Hi there, I'm Donnie MacRae and I'm an L&D project manager within Scotland Excel. So thank you all for accessing our Stay Connected project management fundamental session. The scope of the session will essentially cover the critical elements involved within project management, and hopefully you'll find the session beneficial. So the first thing I'd like to talk you through first of all is where the projects fit in the overall kind of piece. This is taken from the Association of Project Management Body of Knowledge, and I think it's a really good descriptor of some of the probably more common known terminology which you might be used to, such as project, obviously, a programme and portfolio. And as you can see there, a project is essentially what a lot of people are used to working within, and it is generally termed as a lesser scale, leading to an output, as it says there, but that will essentially form the part of a wider programme. So if you are part of a set of projects that are working towards and aligned towards the same goal, they will generally be part of an overall project programme, essentially with a whole host of change management initiatives, which ultimately will deliver benefits, ultimately meeting the same strategic or corporate goal. What will then happen is all these individual projects that roll into these programmes, all subsequent programmes will actually form part of a corporate or the company's portfolio. So that's the whole collection of projects, programmes, everything that is aimed towards the overall strategic objectives of the company. So that's just a kind of starting point for you all. This is just another visual representation of how it can look in probably just another context. You have obviously the host organisation, which can be, if I go top down, as we just covered previously there, you have your portfolio of programmes. So you would then have your programme within your portfolio and your projects, again, sitting within the programme. That's not to say there can't be standalone projects out with that maybe are quite strategically important, quite complex, quite new. They can actually stand alone within the portfolio in its own right, just due to a lot of the time due to complexity, scope and size, which we'll cover shortly. Also with that, you might have standalone programmes, or indeed you can have standalone projects that may have, some kind of sensitivity around them. So again, there is no right or wrong, but it is just another representation of how the projects all hang together. The first thing you have to consider is the environment that you have to make your project a success. I think the first thing I want to get across here is any project has to be working in tandem with the business, because essentially that's why the project is taking place in the first place. It is aimed at improving something or identifying something that needs to improve within the business. So they shouldn't be pulling in different directions. It has to be aligned to the business. And from experience, that isn't always the case. So I'd like to just talk you through top down the 6 key elements that we've got on the screen here. You as the project manager or the project lead should assemble and ensure that you've got a project team who have clear roles within the project, but more importantly, what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. That's your governance. That's the first thing you have to get in place. So just make sure you have that properly mapped out and agreed. Working with your sponsor or your stakeholders, it's imperative that from the outset you have a very, very clear set of objectives. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve from the project? Where does it fit into the strategy? Is it a standalone project? All these things have to be taken into consideration. So again, that will ultimately detail what your scope is going to be, and I will cover that more in depth within the session. That's essentially what is in your project and what is not in your project, which is the outer scope elements. And again, we'll cover that. That then leads to what we call a term called benefits realisation. The best way I can surmise that is just, what does good look like? Thinking ahead. What financial savings are you going to make? What processes are going to improve? What satisfaction measures are going to increase? Whatever your objectives are setting out, they're very, very clear. They should then follow through into your benefits realisation. How are you going to know if your project's been a success? That's how you evaluate your objectives. So you go back, what benefits have actually been realised? So again, that's really important to take that into consideration. Absolutely, working with your business. You are going to need business, probably headcount at some point to work with you through your project. You have to define what resource requirement you need from the outset. That's not to say that's going to be set. It will change, but it's really important that you map that out very, very clearly and agree that with your stakeholders and indeed your wider project team from the outset. Very, very clearly aligned with your objectives. What are you going to be measured on? What's the agreed measures of success? Now, it's important to mention that this is for the project, but it should be tied into the business. So agree what these KPIs are, key performance indicators. How are you going to track the success of your project? What are you being measured on as a project team? And finally on this, just make sure that from the outset you have properly documented materials throughout. Now, that could be your project plan, your business case, whatever set of documentation that you have. It's imperative that from the outset it's all properly version controlled, maintained and distributed in a timely manner. So that is really, really important. Might sound quite negative, but it's really important to think of this from the outset, because hopefully these are things that you will steer clear of and have at the forefront of your mind. Projects have failed in the past for a number of reasons, but these are some of the key reasons why these projects have failed. Essentially, a lack of effective leadership, generally from on high. There's just been no leadership or drive to move the project forward. That in turn, no senior management ownership. Nobody's really bought in to drive that at a strategic level, which then leads to another aspect, which is a lack of clear vision and agreed goals. The project doesn't really get off the ground. There has to be a clear vision. What do you want to achieve and how are you going to get there? Something that generally happens quite a lot, unfortunately, is something called scope creep. Excuse me. That's whereby you might have outlined what your cover is going to cover, but what it's not going to cover. These not covered elements begin to creep in, and as such, your project just gets out of hand, just gets too big. There may be some poor planning from the outset, and estimations even might have been way out. So again, these are things that you have to take into consideration. But you as a project manager must make sure you've got effective controls, because that is the reason why projects have failed in the past. So just make sure that you're aware of that. Having adequate resourcing from the outset to take your project forward, absolutely crucial. It might sound obvious, but just make sure that you've properly mapped that out. There's maybe been some ineffective measurement of the benefits. Your project may well have been a success, but if you've not effectively measured that, or it's measuring the wrong things, then again, that is going to fail. You may fail to meet your objectives. So just make sure you're very, very clear on how you're going to measure your benefits. That in turn leads to a lack of attention to benefits. That's the whole point of why you're doing it. Your stakeholders, it's going to be one of the burning questions that they have. Why should I fund this project? What is the benefits? It's one of the key things that they will be looking for. And let's be honest about it, clashes between partners sometimes can affect projects. There could be clashes of personalities. It can be tough. But again, just make sure that that's properly managed as best you can in the proper fashion throughout the duration of your project. I'd like to talk to you briefly about business cases. It's maybe something that you might not need, but if you are starting a project from absolutely the ground up, you're going to need funding, or you're going to need some kind of resource element to justify why that project should happen in the first place. And without reading them verbatim, there's just a couple of really good definitions, particularly the APM one, which we follow through in the public sector. So again, that just gives you, it's really justifying why you need to do the project that you want to do, because you've identified a clear rationale and need within the business. But more importantly, it's going to help justify what you feel is the preferred solution that you would like to take forward. And I'll just take that further for you. Just some very, very high level things that you should consider within your business case. So obviously clearly map out and identify who's your key sponsor within your project, and ultimately is it yourself that's the project manager? So again, you need to be very, very clear if you're managing the project, who's going to be managing it. Within your business case, you should also have a very, very detailed project overview, as it says there, around the description of what the project is, what the background, where it's came about, the vision, what's good going to look like, where are you going to take this? What are the very, very clear objectives of the project? Yeah, what are you setting out to achieve? Where does it fit into the strategy of the business? That's absolutely crucial. Does it fit into a wider strategic element, or is it a standalone? But more importantly for you, what lessons have you learned from previous projects, previous initiatives? Have you taken that into consideration? That's a great sales tool or selling point for you at the start of your business case. Something you have to consider is the options that are out there, not just diving in and looking at a solution. One of the first things you will get asked and expect to get asked is, well, what other options did you consider? So this is a process that you appraise the variety of options that are there and ultimately come up with the justification of the recommendation that you propose. So essentially, it's all the background that led you to the solution. You would then provide a very, very high-level scope initially about what you are going to cover within your project in scope, but just as importantly, what's not in scope. You can then break down to the various headings you can see there around financial and non-financial. What are the benefits? Give some true statements, based on baseline figures. So if you are going to make an improvement in the customer satisfaction, you're going to make savings to the business, give some true value, give some true numbers, but base it on facts and stats that you've got currently so that people can see an actual trend about where things are going to go. Make sure you've got proper governance within your business case as well. You're outlining the team that you need, the roles, responsibilities, what they're going to do within the project, because that in turn will help you define what your resource requirements are for your project as well. At this point as well, it's very important to put in place what your high-level communications and reporting plan is going to be. That's so that people can see exactly how the whole traction of the project is going to be communicated, but more importantly, what reports are going to come out at the back end of that just to show progress. You would also include within that a very, very high-level indicative project plan, and I'll cover that shortly about the elements you should take into account for that. Obviously, you would have an outline what your cost and funding plan is going to be for this. That's absolutely crucial. Maybe it sounds like stating the obvious, but it's important that you actually include that within your business case. Also undertake some business impact assessment as well. Obviously, this project is going to have an impact, hopefully for the positive on the business, but also during the project, you may well be taking resource from within the business. So you have to properly do some impact assessment and what the impact is going to be. And ultimately, you would hope to get that signed off. So that's just a good starting point for anybody that's wanting to know about how you would go about and pull together your business case. Without reading, as I say, all the detail on the slide here, one of the absolute crucial elements from the outset is controlling the scope of your project. But it is really, really important to define what is and what is not included. So again, there's just some pointers and some questions. So if you're ever tasked or handed a new project by your sponsor, these are your starter for 10 questions. You really want to sit down and really get a pointed answer to these questions. What is the project responsible for delivering? Get that mapped out. What's it not going to deliver? That will avoid any creep. That's not to say you won't discuss maybe other bits coming in further down the line, but if you've made it very clear about what you are responsible for, but just as importantly, responsible for delivering within this project, define and set out and agree what the objectives are. Again, what needs to change and what effect are those changes going to be, because that in turn is going to help you formulate your benefits realisation. What's going to stay the same? You don't want to touch things that might appear within scope, but again, is not within the remit of your project. So just make sure you map that. Think about your stakeholders as well. Which stakeholders are going to be affected and how? Don't always assume that these are senior stakeholders. Obviously, they are important, but your stakeholders can be the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. How is this going to affect them and how? So go and speak to them. Think about other projects as well that might be impacted, both impacted by what you're doing, but is there any other out with project work going on that's maybe going to have an impact on what you're setting out to do. So again, there might be some boundaries that need to be agreed. And again, let's avoid any duplication of tasks as well. But I can't stress enough, it's so important to map what is out of scope as well as what is in scope at this stage. And just on the back of that, this is where I want to discuss project interdependencies. There may be elements within your project that can't be completed until something else within another project has to be completed. And I'm going to show an example of how that can work shortly in an independence diagram. But again, that's just another statement for you that the APM have defined. So they state that it's something in which successful delivery of the project critically depends, which may often be outside the sphere of influence of the project manager. For example, another project. A good example of that could be you may well have been handed a project to deploy the Windows 10 deployment across your business, your council. Once you've done a proper scope of that, you're probably going to identify that can't happen until there's been a kit upgrade done, new laptops, etc. So again, that would potentially be another project. So there's a classic interdependency. You cannot hope to get your Windows 10 deployment project completed until everybody has the suitable hardware to make that happen. So just on the back of that, that's just a diagram, and it is a very good way of representing how you can illustrate interdependencies within your project documentation. Example here is that you may be responsible for rolling out cloud technology within your organisation. So obviously that can't happen until the purchase of appropriate kit has happened, and in turn, the staff would be trained on what that new technology is. So there's an example of 3 interdependent projects that are all very much dependent on each other. So, and it does happen probably a lot more than you realise. Something I touched on earlier was the options appraisal. And from experience, and I'm talking in the context of business cases here, it is the most important component of your business case. This is the part whereby you are going to probably turn people's eyes, turn people's heads to think, okay, I'm going to go with this. This will show that you've actually thought about it. You've considered other options, and you've not just dived in at the first and obvious one. So what you've actually done by this, going through this process, and it can take quite a bit of time and detail to do it. Something that we don't have time for this session, but it's just something to consider. You would look at what all the options are currently to solve the business problem, because essentially that's why the project's there. What I always suggest to people to include within this is do nothing as an option. People get surprised by that. They think, well, why would you do nothing? Well, it may well be that the objectives and the goals of the project might dictate that. Well, let's just have benchmark what we're doing just now against the other options out there, because it may well stack up that we're actually doing it the right way. We just need to do it better. So again, it is a really, really viable thing to do. So what you would then do is, from the objectives that you've mapped from the outset, you would then just appraise all the options out there initially, a high-level sift against your objectives. Generally, I would suggest to people, I would look at a minimum of 5 options for taking your project forward. You would then get them down to a short list of 3. And within those short list of 3, you would then properly appraise in detail against the benefits, the costs, the associated risks, and the timescales, because generally these are the 4 key things that you would look at from the outset when putting forward your recommendation. You can then apply various weightings and scorings to that and how you want to do it. And that then would ultimately lead to what your recommendation is. And it's a very powerful tool. Rather than diving straight in with what your recommendation is, you're actually funneling through the background and the rationale of what got you there. So it's a very, very powerful thing to put in. Project plan. Again, it's a lot of people think, project managers should know how to do project plans. I'll be honest, it's a separate skill. Just because you are qualified in Microsoft Project, it does not make you a good project manager. So again, it's worthwhile just making sure that people are aware of that. From the outset, always have a very, very baseline, or what I call a high-level project plan. So why do we need it? A lot of people like and are used to project plans. They like to see how things progress. They don't want to look into the detail of things. They just want to see tasks, who owns them, where are we at, and are there any issues that's impacting things getting done. Your project plan, if it's properly implemented, will get things done for you. So there's 3 key things that you really need to consider with any project plan if you're starting one from scratch. If you ever hear of milestones or deliverables, that's essentially the same thing. That's key events that you would have within your project. And an analogy I could give you, if you are maybe designing a training course, one of the first things you want to do is go and scope exactly what the training requirement is. So that's a key milestone. You would then do design, you would then deliver, you would then evaluate, and you would then go back to the start again, should there be any further scope required. And again, that's just a very, very high level example. Tasks are the absolute minute detail. That's the self-contained units. That's the elements. That's all the tasks that need to be done within any project that sit within all the individual milestones. And when we talk about dependencies, that's when a task can't be completed until another task is done. So that's essentially our relationship. So you might be looking at, if you look at the diagram there, you might have task 4. Task 4 might not be able to get completed until task 3, 2, or 1 is actually in place first. So it's a good way of letting the project manager and the team see exactly where you are and what still needs to be done. It's very, very important to make sure that if any project management activity you take on, you should make sure you've got a life cycle in place for your project. And I'm going to show you an example of that shortly. I always try to say to my students that try and adopt the milestones that you have in place for your project plan and mirror them within your project milestones, because they really shouldn't be any different. That's the cycles or phases of your project that was going to take you through and monitor the progression of your work. And this is another example of how a project life cycle could be mapped out. So again, the example that I've used here is the life cycle of project management that the APM would define. So you can apply this life cycle concept to anything or any project that you have. So if you just look at that through there, if you want to get across and illustrate to your project team about the different milestones or tasks within your life cycle, this is just another good way of getting that across. I'm not going to read all the text that's within the boxes, but I think it's important you can see that there is a kind of natural flow to this life cycle. So first of all, the concept stage, should there be a project, etc. It then moves on to the define stage. Then you then move into develop, implement, embed, and close. So if you decided that those were the key headings within your own project, you would then just carry them across to your project plan, and that in turn details where the specific tasks are going to fit, and they should all run as best they can in a sequential order. One of the things that you may have heard of before or may not is a PID, an implementation document. Any project manager, once they get sign-off of their business case, they then have to bring that to life. So what you're essentially doing is, what you've agreed in your business case, you need to make it happen. Your business case will outline what you want to do and why. What your PID will do is how you're going to do it and when. So again, this is the very, very clear difference. It's basically the one-stop shop. You're going to have one document where you're going to have every shred of information that you're going to need to take your project forward. You would have that at the start of your project, continue to update it right the way through all cycles. And that's, as it says there, that's taking your business case to live implementation. So you would properly version control and distribute that as and when you see fit. It just saves copious amounts of different paperwork getting sent out to different people, because what it will have is every piece of information everybody could want on the project. And that's something within our PD and project management that we go into very, very deep detail on and show you exactly how to do this. And as I say, it works very, very well for the learners that we've had. We bring live projects to our course and we take them through and show them how to create one of these and embed it. Lessons learned is absolutely crucial, and it's one of the things we touched on earlier on, but any project manager should always be looking to track the lessons learned. And that's not to say that you know, that you're marking your own card as such. Think about you as a project manager. If you get a similar project further down the line, you're going to want to track both for your sponsor about what worked and what didn't work, but for yourself. You know, if you were to take on a similar project, would you do it differently? Why? How would you do it? So again, it's really, really important to properly capture your lessons learned as you go. One of the things that you would do is you would just disseminate that, evaluate what it's telling you, but make sure that you store that. Once your project has actually been closed down, you should always include a lessons learned aspect, and I'll touch on that shortly again. But again, but from the start, go and speak to people. What lessons learned? You know, if I'm given a new project, one of the first things I do is I go and search where there are other projects of a similar nature out there. Get advice from look on local communities of practice, or speak to people who'll be able to share if they've done it. You know, it maybe give you a really, really good starting point. Obviously, you have to take into consideration your project risks, and that's where you would have a risk register right the way through the duration of your project. Another good definition there for you. Basically, a risk is something that potentially might happen, but it's always worthwhile jotting it down because it puts it in people's forefront. I'm going to touch on it shortly, which is issues, but issues are essentially when a risk is potentially not been identified and it's actually happened. So we'll touch on it shortly. But again, a lot of risks within projects are because project plans are based on estimates. So don't worry if you feel that you do have a lot of risks. You know, it's worthwhile noting the risks. They might just stay as risks. They might not happen. But at least if you've got them managed there and you're sitting with the risks detailed, you've got the thought process started about what you're going to do if it does happen. All right. But again, it's just to bear in mind from the outset. A good way of assessing the risks is to do a very, very simple and basic impact assessment. So as you can see there, you've got the likelihood of a risk happening to the impact of if it did. So the example, if you look there, so let's just say 1 being negligible, 4 being high. So if you were to identify that the likelihood of something happening was quite high, yeah, but the impact again was low, then it would be 8. So you're sitting saying, okay, it's there, we need to be mindful of it. So anything that sits in the red zone, that's really going to have quite a significant impact and would need to be addressed on your project. So it is a good starting point for you to have that conversation and just do some impact and risk assessment. It's very, very simple and very quick to do, to be honest. So issues. Again, it does say there that issues are anything that might affect the project meeting its objectives. I always state that issues are risks that have came to life, basically. But that's not to say issues have to be risks or properly identified in the first place. They don't. A lot of issues can come right out the blue. Things can change. I think we only need to look at the past few months to see how quickly things can change. But again, it's important to have good risk management. But just as importantly, you as a project manager should act on your issues. Yeah, if the issue has occurred, what has happened? Why did it happen? But what are you going to do to make sure that you get that resolved? So again, and get all that captured in your implementation document. But again, you've always feed these back to your stakeholders as well. Again, they're not only issues. It could be things that your stakeholder themselves has highlighted as being an issue. So again, you have to track all that. Now moving to the kind of closure stage. So again, a lot of people think, well, how do I close my project down? Well, essentially, if you get to the point and you think, well, I've got 100% in all my tasks in my project plan here, you then have to look at the bigger picture. You have to say to yourself, okay, have the project objectives been achieved? Are they achieved? Have I compiled a lessons learned document? Is that finalised? And have I disseminated it to all for thoughts and for feedback? Have I conducted some evaluation of how well the project has been delivered? Don't just walk away. More often than not, you're not going to see the benefits until probably 2 or 3 months after it's been closed. So again, we'll touch on that in the next slide or two. You must ensure that you have a proper handover to business as usual. You'll be amazed at the amount of times that doesn't happen. You've probably been working with these teams day in, day out. Make sure they're very, very clear on what the changes are and what is now going to change now that the project is officially closed. but also set some time for you as a project manager as well, some time for what we call post-project review. And again, we'll touch on that and I'll show you exactly how you would go about that. So how would you go about evaluating the effectiveness of your project? You've obviously, if you've done it the right way, you'll be measuring your benefits from the project right at the start. Now that could be both formative, which you are looking at the benefits during your project, but also summative. Look at it collectively at the benefits, how they've been achieved at the end of your project. So again, look at what risks, issues, and ultimately maybe some changes after your evaluation that have to take place. But just take a total review about how that's been implemented and how you've embedded that from the project inception. So this is where you want to go back and check, okay, has the vision been realised? Have we met our objectives? Have the benefits been realised? Is it actually real? Are we actually seeing some tangible benefits now? And have I conducted an effective evaluation of everything? Have I looked at the measures of what I set out that the project was going to achieve? So proper evaluation is crucial. That in turn will then generate some follow-on actions and recommendations back to the business. It generally forms part of an evaluation report. Different businesses, different clients will have different, preferred formats of that. However, just make sure that you are providing an evaluation report. There's no right or wrong to what the content of that would be, but however, you might have some follow-on actions and recommendations that you want to feed back into the business to take the project forward. That should form part of your evaluation report. But again, you might have some unfinished tasks that does happen that you want to pass back to the business. You might have identified some ongoing risks that they just need to take into consideration that might have a wider impact. But again, you may have an issue that through no fault of anybody was of such an extent that a change process had to be put in place that might not have been carried out in time or during the project. Again, there might have been quite a serious risk that's been identified that in turn might have an impact on the business as usual out with your project. Please make sure that you're having a handover of any training needs. Again, that's sometimes the obvious one that's missed out. So involve your local L&D teams as well, because there will be an impact and a change that is going to negate some kind of L&D intervention. And just map any other activities that you feel have to be fed back into the business. Post-project review is proper project management etiquette, I would suggest. Because as it says there, in many cases, your post-project review, again, it can't be properly assessed until the change is in place for some time. So what you want to do as a project manager is go back. Generally, these things happen 6 months after a project's finished. That's generally when it does happen. Because what it does give you at that point is it gives you a chance to look in the real world. Have the outcomes been as they were expected? Have the project benefits, have they occurred as we thought they would? Is the operational working as planned? Has it not had a detrimental effect to the operation? And were the costs as expected? So please make sure that you put that post-project review in place, because it's vital that you then go back. Because again, if you get any negative outputs from this, then you need to do a bit of deep dive and figure out why that happened. But again, you could also look at stakeholder satisfaction, lessons learned, and just areas for further development. It's a really, really positive session for you to have with your stakeholders, and it's great for you as a project manager because you can get concrete evidence that what you said you would do has actually occurred, and that's ultimately what you hope to happen at the end of the day. So finally, for me, I'd just like to thank you all for your time throughout the last 40 to 45 minutes. Hopefully you found that beneficial. We do the PDA in project management within Scotland Excel, where we take people through real live projects from business case to implementation. So if you think that's something that you would like to become involved in or like more information, absolutely, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. All right, so thank you very much for your time and stay safe.